You're listening to the Warriors of Dystonia Podcast, a podcast sharing the stories and journeys of people whose lives are affected by dystonia. My name is Carl and I'm the creator of Warriors of Dystonia. I've had dystonia since 2007 and I started this project to spread awareness of the condition. Each podcast will be a chat with someone who either has dystonia, cares for someone with dystonia, a representative from a dystonia charity, or perhaps a dystonia specialist. Warriors of Dystonia is all about awareness. The following podcast is from Jakki, who is living with a rare condition combining three types of dystonia. The condition is called tetrahydrobiopterin deficiency generalised dopa responsive dystonia. It leaves Jakki in a fixed sitting wheelchair position and ongoing pain. Currently, there is nobody else with this form of dystonia in the UK. This is Jakki's story.
I was diagnosed in 2009, but I've had this condition since birth, which was 1968. I was the third child in the family. My mum noticed something wasn't quite right because I was late sitting up and I was late walking, and then when I did start to walk, I walked on my tiptoes. So she took me to the GP. She was told she was a fussy mother and nothing was wrong. I went on to have the whooping cough injection. An hour after I had it, I had a fit. And Mum noticed even more severe deterioration then. She was told she was still a fussy mother. About the age of, I would say 3.5, I had a tremor. When I got tired, I was walking on my tiptoes and falling over constantly. My dad went with my mum again to the GP and insisted we go to the children's hospital. Eventually I got to the children's hospital and straight away they said, oh yes, she's got cerebral palsy. It could be that. She needs physio every day. So my mum then took me for physio every day until the school age, and the physio said no way as she got cerebral palsy. So I was under paediatricians. I had loads of tests, everything was negative. My mum and dad fought for me to attend an ordinary school. They lost. I had to attend a school for the disabled. They also fought for me to get to grade. Huge battle that was. My dad had to get MPs and local councillors involved. Eventually it was agreed I could go to, and we went down. I was about 8. I had all the tests, all the latest tests. They took a piece of muscle to grow and analyse. They lost that, and then they said all the other tests came back negative. By this point, I was in a wheelchair. I couldn't walk unaided at all. I had a severe tremor. I couldn't pick anything up, and I'd be okay in the mornings without a tremor when I first woke up, but as I got tired, the tremor got worse and worse, and by the time it was, I would say 11:30 at school, I couldn't write, I couldn't sit up, I lost my speech. I was having physio because it was a school for the disabled. I was having physio twice a day, but it wasn't doing anything. I knew it wasn't doing anything. I was even going to physio at the hospital on the Saturday as well. So I was having physio 6 days out of 7. As I got to be 16, still no diagnosis. Despite everything that came out, I was the first person to have it. Nothing. We went from me having cerebral palsy to me having a muscular condition to me having junior Parkinson's to then me going back to they had no idea. About age 16, I was now totally in the wheelchair all the day, entire day, in an electric wheelchair now because I was so weak in my arms. I was also forming contractures of the hips and of my knees, and I couldn't straighten either of them. So they couldn't even put me in a standing frame anymore to stand me up. I left school, went to college, continued at the hospital, physio treatment, but I was going downhill rapidly. Then I seemed to plateau for about 5 years, and they brought out the MRI scan, and I was the first person in to have the MRI scan, which, surprise, surprise, at that point showed nothing. I was seeing a neurologist at that point, not the most pleasant of people, and I hadn't had a good relationship with any medic, if I'm honest. A lot of them thought I was either at it or that I wasn't trying hard enough or that my parents were too pushy. They just wanted answers. They firmly believed at one point it was the whooping cough injection, to a point that had made me so severe. We now know that isn't the case. But anyway, at the time, that was the connection. I was seeing my neurologist at this point. I was about 26, 27. And I was seeing my neurologist I think it was every 4 to 6 months. And I went, and he said to me, "Don't come back until you're pregnant. I don't need to see you now until you're pregnant." And I said, "What?" I was like gobsmacked. I hadn't even got a partner or anything. And he said, "We think this is genetic, so you just need to come back when you're pregnant." And I said to him, "What do you mean you think it's genetic?" He said, "We've known that since you went to when you were 8. So of course I thought my mum and dad hadn't told me something. So I went out into the waiting room and said to them, "What haven't you told me?" And they knew nothing about it. So we all went back into the neurologist and said, "What are you on about?" Because this is the first time we've heard anything like this. And he said, "I never said that." And he refused he'd ever said anything to me. And of course it was his word against mine. And he said, "I'm discharging you." That was when I was about 26, 27. And I just decided I needed to carry on, live my life, and just make the best of what I'd got. I was totally wheelchair bound. I was totally wheelchair shape. I couldn't lay down. It was an awful situation. I was on a tablet for Parkinson's disease, which kind of helped the tremor a bit. By the age of 35, I had deteriorated like no other. It was awful. By about 2 o'clock during the day, my father had to lift me into bed. I couldn't sit up in my wheelchair. I couldn't feed myself. I couldn't write. I couldn't do anything for myself whatsoever. I couldn't wipe myself. I couldn't do anything. The GP was trying all sorts of medication, and he said, "You're going to have to go back to the hospital." And I cannot begin to tell you how much fear was in my heart. I was terrified, and I have a strong faith, and I sort of said, okay, if that's what I need to do, that's what I need to do. I was given a list of neurologists, and my old neurologist was on it, and obviously I didn't want to go back to him. And many of the others were on it that I'd seen before, but there was this one that I'd never heard of. And I said, I'll have that. That's an unusual name. I'll go to him. I was 35 at this point, and I went to him, and he said to me, I think you might have something a bit like dystonia. He said, but I'm not too sure. Tell you what, I'll give you some Cinemat and see if that helps you. He said, just take half a tablet and then build it up to a whole tablet. Now, I had medication in the past from various neurologists over my life, and I'd always had violent reactions. So I'd gone home, said to my dad, I've got this Cinemat tablet. He said to me, I want you to take it when I'm in the house, and I want you to take a quarter of it first. I don't want you taking a full half. And I said, oh, I'll be all right. And he said, no. He said, you had so much when you were a child and had violent reactions. He said, please take a quarter. So I agreed to take a quarter. Within 10 minutes, I was being violently sick. What I now know is severe dyskinesia. I had that so severe I couldn't keep my arms and legs still at all. I was thrashing about. My back was rigid. It was arching and rigid. So I didn't take any more. Went back to Dr. told him, and he kind of looked at me as if to say, yeah, right, okay. He then said to me, well, the only way we can determine this is for you to come in for a day. Now, I had no faith in the medics. I'd had such appalling treatment, and I didn't trust this doctor either at that point. At that point, might I add. He turned out to be the gem of my life. I went into hospital for the day with my best friend, and this junior doctor came to me and said to me, oh, we're going to give you Cinemat again like you took at home. We're going to give you half a tablet. And I said, no, you're not. You're going to give me quarter. No, she said, you'll be fine on half. I said, no. I says, I'm prepared to take a quarter and have the reaction I had last time at home, but I'm not prepared to take half. I says, I tell you what, I'll do you a deal. If you give me quarter and I'm all right, then I'll let you give me another quarter. I said, but otherwise I am not taking a half. She gave me quarter, and within 10 minutes I was throwing up. I was thrashing about, and she screamed down the ward, get the video camera. They got the video camera, they videoed me, and they waited for the effects to wear off, which was over 12 hours, and I was sent home. I then received an urgent phone call from who said to me, Jakki, you need to come into hospital immediately. I believe you. I believe wholeheartedly in your symptoms. This is something that we haven't dealt with before. He says, I've got this hunch. And I said, right. He said, you need to come into hospital. And I said, no, I'm not coming into hospital. I said, I've got no faith in the system. And he said to me, you need to trust me. If I promise to come and see you every day and guide you through these tests and guide you through the treatment, I'm going to start you on a tablet at a very, very tiny dose. Will you do it? And so I reluctantly, I knew I couldn't go on the way I was. I'd got no quality of life whatsoever. I was losing my speech midday. I couldn't feed myself. It wasn't an existence that I wanted. I couldn't stand, I couldn't walk, and I hadn't done for years. Not that I ever thought that would ever change. I knew this was for life now. I wanted to be able to at least sit in my wheelchair again and at least be able to do some things like go out again. So I agreed to go into hospital. Cut a very long story short, hospital admissions, in and out with tests, went on for a further 6 years. I would say 3 or 4 times a year I was in hospital having tests. Needless to say, they all came back negative. I had the phenylaline test. That showed some kind of dystonia, and Dr. hunch was it was dopamine connected. So he started me on Madapar, and over the 6 years I tried every medication going, from Rochidine patches to Systolivo, back to Madapar, then back to the Rochidine patches. At one point I was on Madapar 10 times a day just to function. He decided he needed me to go and see the world specialist in movement disorders, Professor. It wasn't too successful. Basically, they wanted me to be admitted that day because I was such an interesting case. And I refused because I'd built up a relationship with by this point. I trusted him and him alone. And so I said, all the tests that you want can be done in Nottingham, and I'd rather them be done there. Little did I know that I was so interested and he wanted to write a paper on me, and that's why he wanted to do the test. So eventually it was agreed between the two hospitals and between Dr. and Professor that London would support Dr. to do this very rare test. I'd have all the other ones that were the run of the mill, like a DAT scan, a dopamine agonist scan. They were all run of the mill, but I'd got to have this other test where they had to take so many mils of my spinal fluid out, but it had to be couriered down to London within the space of it leaving my body within 2 hours. And then they would do the testing and send the result back. So all this was done, and we were told it would take 4 months. At the end of that 4 months, we would have a definite diagnosis. They were sure of it. And at the end of that 4 months, they said they'd lost the results. Now, Dr. knew they hadn't, and that they wanted to write a paper on me because they'd found the diagnosis and it was so rare. That was his total belief that they hadn't lost it at all. Anyway, we had to get MPs involved. We had to get the health secretary at the time involved. And eventually, after just over 2 years of waiting, on the 27th of May 2009, we got the diagnosis from them, and they said it had slipped down the filing cabinet. And the diagnosis is tetrahydrobiopterin deficiency, generalised dopa responsive dystonia. So that is 3 dystonias in one. You've got the dopa responsive dystonia, which is not fairly common, but fairly well known. You've got the generalised dopa responsive dystonia, and then you've got the tetrahydrobiopterin, and that's the bit that was all the battle about over writing the paper on me about. I was later told that I was the 22nd reported case in the world. There's nobody else in the UK as far as they know. Since then, the dystonia has moved to my internal organs. They've never seen this in anybody else. I've moved from nothing to now, and I'm under a different neurologist. He's just as good as Dr. I've still got an open appointment with Dr. And if I ever need to go to him, or my neurologist here needs to speak to them, they do. They confer, because I am so rare. How does it affect me now? I sleep sitting up. I cannot lay down at all. I'm totally fixed in one position, and that's it. I'm hoisted with electric hoist. I have 4 care calls a day. I cannot sit up on my own. Sometimes when I'm so bad and rigid, I cannot feed myself. I cannot speak. I lose my speech. On a good day, I can sit in my wheelchair and I can type and I can do the odd thing around the house. I have severe anxiety and depression. They think because I don't make tetrahydrobiopterin, which is the chemical before you make dopamine, you need tetrahydrobiopterin to make dopamine, and I'm not making the tetrahydrobiopterin, which means I'm not making the dopamine. But they think in between those 2 stages, they think I'm making too much adrenaline, hence why I get such severe anxiety, which is totally out of my control. Whether I've tried all sorts of techniques and medications and nothing helps, and they think it's because it's the chemicals in my brain. It's just one of those things. The depression, I think the chronic pain has a lot to do with my depression and gets me down. I think that part of it does. There's some days I'm in so much pain, I don't know what to do. I have Botox in my spine from top to bottom, 1,500 mils, which they'd never given to anybody before until I arrived 2 and a bit years ago. So they're learning with me. I haven't met anybody else, even online. I have with dopa responsive dystonia, but not with the tetrahydrobiopterin, and certainly not with all 3 or even 2 forms of dystonia like generalised and dopa. I'm on tons of medication. I think the last time I counted it was 39 tablets a day, just to be able to sit up in my wheelchair. And like I say, I have carers. I can't take myself to the toilet. Sometimes I can't feed myself, and sometimes on really, really, really bad occasions, if I'm poorly or whatever, I can't speak. I've seen some really, really good neurologists, and I've seen some really appalling ones when I look back over my life now. I can count on one hand the ones that have been there and seen me through tough times, and they've been amazing, and they will always hold a special place in my heart. My dystonia is genetic. Apparently it normally goes down the male line, and there's a 25% chance only that it goes down the female line. Normally, when it goes down the female line, it comes out as Parkinson's, but there's a 25% chance it can lay dormant and you're just the female carrier, and there's a 5% chance that it affects me like it has done. That's the genetic side of it. I don't know of anybody in my family who have had it. I know my uncle had Parkinson's and they think that was related. Both my mum and my dad had to be carriers of the gene. On the internet, there's not a lot on tetrahydrobiopterin deficiency, generalised dopa responsive dystonia, but there is a bit about on Wikipedia about it, and it's also called GH4, I think it is. So, yeah, that's my story.
Thank you so much for listening to the Warriors of Dystonia podcast. If you'd like to be on the podcast or you wish to find out more about the project, please head on over to warriorsofdystonia.wordpress.com, or you can search for Warriors of Dystonia on Instagram, Facebook or Google. The Warriors of Dystonia book is now available. Whether directly having dystonia or caring for someone who has it, Warriors of Dystonia shares the candid, emotional journeys and experiences of people from all over the world whose lives are affected by this chronic neurological condition. This book is also available through the Warriors of Dystonia website, or just search Warriors of Dystonia book on Google.